Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Saturday, July 18th. Tonight, we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Bolivia to Gambia. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. Bolivia has turned its attention to the land, not to the headlines it usually makes, but to the quiet work of knowing it better. By Supreme Decree number 5658, the government has declared the 2026 agricultural census a national priority. It sounds administrative, and in a way it is, but a census like this is really an act of listening. Bolivia's highlands, its valleys, its eastern lowlands, they all feed the country differently, and the people who work that land have stories that numbers can help tell. An agricultural census asks who is farming, what they are growing, how much land they tend, what tools they rely on. It's a portrait painted slowly, field by field. For a country where rural life remains central to identity and economy, this kind of counting matters. It shapes policy, yes, but it also acknowledges the people whose labor doesn't always reach the news. The decree gives the census weight, placing it among the things the state commits to getting right. And in a region where agricultural data can be uneven or outdated, that commitment is its own kind of respect. So over the coming months, Bolivia will begin the patient work of reaching its farmers, hearing what the land has been doing, and writing it down. If you're still with me, think of it as a country leaning in to hear its own countryside, not in a hurry, but with care. South Africa is looking to its factories again. The country once stood as Africa's largest manufacturer, a title it has now lost, settling into second place on the continent. The response is ambitious, a plan to channel $46 billion into new industrial hubs, with a target of having the groundwork in place by April. The scale is worth pausing on. $46 billion is not a modest figure. It speaks to a country that remembers what it was built to make: the steel, the machinery, the goods that once moved from its ports to the rest of the world, and wants to reclaim some of that ground. Industrial hubs, if they take shape, could mean work in places where jobs have grown scarce, and a foothold for young people entering an economy that hasn't always made room. There's a quiet dignity in the idea of building things again. South Africa has long been a country of makers, of mines and mills and assembly lines that hummed through the night. Whether this plan becomes reality or stays a blueprint on a desk, the intention itself says something. It says the country is not ready to watch its industrial story fade. And if you're still with me, that's worth sitting with for a moment. A nation deciding to build even before the first foundation is poured. Belarus has long walked a narrow line, and these days the walking seems harder. Observers describe a country being pulled steadily into Moscow's orbit, its crackdown on national identity. One commentator puts it as dancing to Moscow's tune. The phrase carries weight in a place where language, memory, and belonging have always been quietly contested ground. The pressure shows in small, accumulating ways. More names added to official extremist lists, 22 recently, including a Russian citizen. Civil defense shelters being modernized, read by some analysts as a signal of strategic intent. A new Polish military formation taking shape across the border, built for watchfulness rather than confrontation, but present all the same. And yet Belarus is not only a story of pressure. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the opposition leader in exile, appeared recently at the Tutaka Festival, a gathering where observers note the conversation has moved beyond political prisoners alone toward something broader about what Belarus is and might be. A delegation from the presidential administration met with Chinese officials. The threads of the country's life run in more than one direction. The high-wire act is teetering, but teetering is not falling. It is the uncertain middle of something. A country held between gravity and balance, still finding out which way the weight will settle. Azerbaijan says it has reached what it calls real peace with its neighbor Armenia, and yet a formal treaty between the two remains just out of reach. The holdup from Azerbaijan's side comes down to a constitution. Azerbaijan wants Armenia to change its foundational document, which still contains language Azerbaijan considers a claim on its territory. Until that language is revised, the handshake stays warm but unsigned. It's worth remembering what these two countries have come through. Decades of conflict over the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, waves of displacement, years of frozen front lines. The fighting has stopped. Trade between them is actually growing, goods moving across borders that not long ago were sealed by mistrust. That's not nothing. That's something people can feel in their daily lives. But peace treaties are strange things. They can seem like mere paperwork when the guns are quiet, and then turn out to matter enormously later, when memories fade and old arguments resurface. Azerbaijan seems to want the foundation settled before it commits anything to paper. And so the two countries sit in this unusual space, not at war, not fully reconciled, trading goods while debating words. If you're still with me, you might notice how often the world lives in that in-between. Not the dramatic moment, but the long, patient stretch after it, where the real work gets done quietly, and the future is shaped one clause at a time. South Sudan's Catholic bishops are sounding a note of caution about the country's political future, warning of a constitutional crisis that could gather around the question of elections. It's the kind of concern that arrives quietly, but carries real weight in a nation still finding its footing after years of conflict. The bishops, whose voices carry deep moral authority across communities, are essentially asking whether the foundations are ready, whether the legal and constitutional framework is strong enough to hold a credible vote. It's a question not of politics alone, but of timing, of preparation, of honesty about what's in place and what isn't. In South Sudan, where the church has often been a steadying presence when other institutions have faltered, a warning like this lands differently than it might elsewhere. It comes from people close to the ground, close to the communities who would live with the consequences. And it's offered not as alarm, but as care, a call to pay attention before the moment arrives. The country has been here before, navigating the delicate space between peace agreements and the structures that make peace lasting. Elections are a promise of self-determination, but they ask a great deal of a young nation. Clear laws, agreed rules, trust in the process. Whether that work is underway and whether there's time to finish it is what the bishops are asking the country to consider. It's a question worth sitting with as the night settles over the Nile and the towns along its banks. Brazil is moving carefully these days. Caught in a trade dispute it didn't start, the United States has imposed new tariffs on Brazilian goods, some at 25%. And for a country whose soybeans, beef, and sugar have long flowed north, that's no small thing. What's striking is Brazil's response. Rather than rush to retaliate, Brasilia has opted for caution. There's been tough talk. Officials have said Brazil will hit back if the tariffs hold, but the actual posture is measured, deliberate. Part of that calculation is practical. The trade action includes exemptions for key agricultural products, which softens the blow for some of Brazil's most important exports, and part of it is strategic. Analysts watching from places like the Peterson Institute have noted that these tariffs may say more about weaknesses in American trade strategy than about Brazil's economy. There's also a legal backdrop worth mentioning. The U.S. Supreme Court recently narrowed one path for imposing tariffs, and this new approach on Brazil may be a test case, with other countries watching closely to see what happens next. For now, Brazil is holding its position, not retreating, not escalating, waiting to see whether the pressure lasts or whether it passes. It's the kind of patience that comes from knowing your own strength and from having been here before. Armenia and Azerbaijan are discovering that commerce can move even when peace cannot. Between these two neighbors, separated by generations of conflict, trade is quietly expanding, even as a formal peace treaty remains just out of reach. The sticking point these days is constitutional. Azerbaijan says it considers itself at what it calls real peace with Armenia, but it wants Armenia to change its constitution before any treaty is signed. For any country, that is no small thing. A constitution is a foundation, not a clause to be rewritten at a neighbor's request. So the treaty waits, but the goods still move. And in the South Caucasus, where borders and histories are tangled, that quiet exchange carries its own meaning. There is also talk of a new trade corridor through Armenia, one backed from Washington, that appears to be moving closer to reality. If it comes, it would reconnect roots that war and time have long severed. None of this settles the old wounds. A peace treaty would do that, and it isn't here yet. But if you're still with me, consider what it means that two countries not long ago beyond conversation are now doing business, debating constitutions, and building roads that might one day carry more than cargo. It is not peace, but it is something. And in this part of the world, something is not nothing. Tuvalu sits low in the Pacific, a small island nation where the sea is never far from anyone's mind. These days, most of Tuvalu's people have applied to relocate to Australia, not because they want to leave, but because climate change keeps pushing the water closer. Rising tides have made the question of staying, for many families, one they can no longer put off. What happens now is still unfolding. Applying is one thing. Packing up a nation's worth of memory, the places, the traditions, the life tied to particular patches of ground, that is something else entirely. The details of how a whole community moves and what it means to hold on to who you are when the land beneath you may not last are still being worked out. Tuvalu is not a footnote in someone else's story. It is one of the smallest countries on Earth, and it has become one of the clearest voices in the climate conversation. When the majority of a nation's people raise their hands to say they may need to leave, the world should listen. Not with pity, but with the respect you'd give a neighbor making a hard decision with dignity. If you're still with me, hold that thought. A whole country weighing its future, looking at a horizon that used to feel like home. And yet the people of Tuvalu are still there, still deciding, still holding on to who they are. Equatorial Guinea, the small Spanish-speaking nation on the west coast of Central Africa, is turning its attention to digital infrastructure. The government has entered a partnership with Huawei, the Chinese telecommunications firm, aimed at strengthening the country's digital foundations. Details remain limited, but the arrangement signals Malabo's interest in the networks that carry phone calls, data, and the quiet machinery of modern connection. For a country spread across a mainland region and scattered islands with the capital on Bioko, some distance from the interior, reliable infrastructure is less a convenience than a kind of bridge. Communities separated by water and forest depend on the unseen systems that link them. The partnership places Equatorial Guinea among several African nations working with Chinese firms on telecommunications, a pattern that has shaped the continent's digital landscape over recent years. What this will look like on the ground, which communities it reaches, how quickly, at what cost, remains to unfold. But the intention itself is worth noticing. A country looking at the cables and signals that run beneath everyday life and deciding it wants more of them, built to last somewhere. The planning is underway. And for now, that's where the story rests, in the promise of connection and the patience of building toward it. In Haiti these days, there's a quiet effort underway, one that doesn't make the loud headlines, but speaks to something durable. A new generation is being trained to confront corruption, to recognize it, name it, and push back. The details are modest, as good groundwork often is. Young Haitians are learning the structures of accountability, the tools of transparency, the habits of asking questions that institutions would rather go unasked. It's the kind of story that unfolds in rooms rather than streets, in workshops, in conversations, in the slow building of civic muscle. And it matters perhaps more than usual, because Haiti carries burdens that would test any society's institutions. The headlines the world tends to hear are of instability, of violence, of strain. Those stories are real and they deserve their weight. But alongside them, there are people choosing the slower, less visible work of repair. Corruption thrives where attention fades and where people lose faith that anything can change. So to teach young people to look closely, to document, to demand better, that is in its way an act of hope. Not a loud hope, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that shows up, learns the rules, and begins to bend them toward fairness. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A room full of young Haitians asking questions, preparing to hold power to account. It's not the whole story of the country, but it's a thread worth following into the night. Cambodia has been in the company of an old friend this week, as China's leader Xi Jinping spoke of carrying forward what both countries call an ironclad friendship. It's a phrase that's been used between Beijing and Phnom Penh for years now, and it points to a relationship built on steady investment, close diplomatic ties, and a shared sense that neither side is going anywhere. Xi also encouraged Cambodia and Thailand to talk through a border dispute rather than let it harden into something worse. A quiet word from a powerful neighbor, the kind of diplomacy that doesn't make headlines but sometimes keeps things from getting worse. For Cambodia, these conversations matter. The country sits between larger powers and has long practiced a careful kind of balance, listening to many voices while holding its own ground. The friendship with China is real and deep, but so are Cambodia's ties across the region, and so is the need to keep borders calm and trade flowing. If you're still with me, you might picture Phnom Penh in the evening, the Mekong slowing as it moves past the riverfront, the city doing what it does, which is to keep going. Diplomacy can feel distant from daily life, but it shapes the space in which daily life happens. And tonight, that space seems steady enough, held in place by an old friendship and a gentle push toward conversation. Cameroon has long been known as the largest economy in Central Africa's CIMAC region, and for years that standing has rested on oil. But these days, there's a quiet shift underway. The country expects a mining windfall, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.75 billion that could, in time, overtake petroleum as its leading source of revenue. It's the kind of transition that doesn't happen all at once. It happens in concessions and port shipments and geological surveys, in the slow building of a sector that hasn't yet reached its full weight, and gold sits at the center of it. Cameroon's soil holds more of it than most people realize, but not all of it stays home. The state mining agency Sonamines has flagged that tens of tons of gold slipped out to Dubai over the past few years. Wealth that moved beyond the country's reach, beyond its tax rolls, beyond its clinics and schools. So now there's a tax recovery operation underway in the gold sector, an effort to gather back what was scattered. It's a familiar story in resource-rich countries, the gap between what the ground gives and what the treasury receives. But there's something steady in the attempt to close that gap, to make the minerals beneath the soil actually serve the people walking above it. If you're still with me, hold that thought. A country learning to count what it already has. North Korea has been quietly receiving guests from Beijing these days. A senior Chinese delegation traveled to the Wonsan Kalma Resort, a sprawling tourist development on the country's eastern coast, still being built into something the government hopes will one day draw visitors by the thousands. The delegation's visit was confirmed by North Korea's own state media, And it came alongside word that Kim Jong-un had met with a top Chinese official. We don't have the full substance of what was discussed. What we can see is the choreography. Two neighbors who have relied on each other for a very long time, choosing to be seen together again. Diplomacy between Pyongyang and Beijing often works this way. The meetings happen, the handshakes are photographed, and the meaning is left partly to interpretation. What's clear is that the Wonsan resort itself carries a certain weight. It's a project Kim Jong-un has returned to again and again, a place meant to signal that North Korea can build for pleasure as well as for defense. When a Chinese delegation walks through a site like that, it suggests Beijing is paying attention to that vision, or at least willing to be seen paying attention. And so, on a quiet stretch of coast where the Korean peninsula meets the Sea of Japan, a bit of careful diplomacy unfolds. No grand announcements, no sweeping declarations, just a visit, a meeting, and the steady reminder that some relationships, however complicated, never quite go dormant. If you're still with me, we'll move on now, carrying that image of the coast with us a little longer. Uganda has been holding its breath this week, the way any country does when children are involved. In the east of the country, a school bus went off the road, and at least 20 young students and their teacher lost their lives. The details that have emerged are spare, and perhaps that is merciful. A bus carrying children on a journey that should have been ordinary, a road that did not deliver them safely home. Parents who sent their children off in the morning and are now demanding answers, wanting to understand how something so routine could turn so devastating. The loss has settled over the community like something physical. These were young children, barely begun. A teacher with them, someone who had chosen to spend their life in their company. Across Uganda, people have gathered around the families, not because gathering makes it easier, but because grief like this asks for company. The questions the parents are asking about the bus, about the road, about what could have been done differently, those questions will take time. They deserve time. For now, if you're still with me, the thing worth carrying tonight is simply this. A country mourning its children, holding them close in memory, and waiting, with whatever patience it can find, for answers that might keep someone else's children safe. Montenegro, that small and mountainous country on the Adriatic coast, has done something that sounds technical but matters more than it might seem. It has completed its constitutional court by electing 2 new judges. For a country this size, institutions don't hum in the background the way they do in larger places. They are close to the surface, felt in daily life, and when one of them sits empty for too long, people notice. The Constitutional Court is the body that guards the rules of the whole system, the place where questions about rights, about laws, about the limits of power finally land. Having it fully staffed again means those questions now have somewhere to go. This matters beyond Montenegro's borders too. The country has its sights set on joining the European Union, and for that aspiration to move forward, certain foundations have to be solid. A working constitutional court is one of those foundations. It is the kind of progress that doesn't come with fireworks. There are no crowds in the streets, no speeches from balconies, just a vote, and then 2 people take their seats, and something that was incomplete is now whole. If you have ever been to Montenegro, you may remember how the mountains seem to lean over the sea, and how the old towns hold their narrow streets like cupped hands. It is a country that carries its history lightly but seriously, and this week, quietly, it took another step toward the future it has chosen for itself, a small repair perhaps. But the kind it holds. In Tunisia, the summer heat has been pressing down hard these days, and the electricity grid has been struggling to keep up. Across the country, neighborhoods have been experiencing rolling power cuts, planned interruptions, rotating from one district to another, as the demand for cooling and light outpaces what the system can deliver. It's the kind of measure no one welcomes, but it's not unfamiliar in places where infrastructure was built for a gentler climate and now has to meet summers that keep arriving earlier and staying longer. Imagine the rhythm of it. A street goes quiet. The hum of air conditioners fades. A refrigerator stops its low murmur. People wait, knowing the power will return, and knowing too that somewhere nearby, another set of homes is now sitting in the same stillness. In Tunisia's older neighborhoods, where thick walls were designed centuries ago to hold the cool, the outages are survivable. In newer districts, built fast and high, the heat finds its way in quickly. Families move through the hours by feel, stepping into shaded courtyards, slowing down, waiting for the grid to breathe again. If you're still with me, hold this one gently. It's not a catastrophe, it's a strain, the kind that builds slowly and asks something of everyone it touches. And across Tunisia, people are carrying it the way they carry most things, with patience, with neighbors, and with the quiet knowledge that the lights will come back on, even if the heat does not. Solomon Islands sits at the heart of a stretch of the Pacific that has always lived by the sea, not beside it, but with it and from it. The reefs, the deep water channels, the currents that cross between islands older than memory, these are not scenery here. They are livelihood, pantry, road, and ancestor all at once. So when the Melanesian nations announced their intention to create a massive ocean reserve corridor, it was not a distant policy idea. It was something closer to a promise made to the water itself. The corridor would stitch together marine areas across the Melanesian arc: Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, a connected sanctuary in a sea that has too often been treated as a highway for everyone else's commerce. The details are still taking shape. Intentions have been stated, not yet signed into law. But the ambition is real, and the scale of it is quietly staggering. A corridor vast enough to let fish migrate, reefs recover, and deep-sea ecosystems hold their ground against the pressures of extraction and warming. For Solomon Islands, where coastal villages still read the tide the way others read a clock, this is a story about keeping faith with what has always sustained them. If you are still with me, picture that water tonight. Not empty, not silent, but alive and moving, the way it has always moved between these islands. And somewhere in that movement, a plan is forming to let it keep going. New Zealand has long been a country the world sees through other people's stories, its mountains standing in for distant kingdoms, its harbors doubling for somewhere else entirely. So there's something quietly satisfying about the news that Netflix has unveiled its first series actually set in New Zealand and named simply for Queenstown. Queenstown sits on the shore of Lake Wakatipu, down on the South Island, a place where the Southern Alps come right down to the water and the light does things that make photographers forget to lower their cameras. It's a town built around adventure, bungee jumping, skiing, mountain biking, but also a town where people live ordinary lives, raise families, watch the seasons turn across the Remarkables, that wall of mountains across the lake. What the series will make of all this, we don't yet know. The details are still arriving. But the fact of it, a global streaming platform choosing to tell a story rooted in this particular corner of the South Island, under its own name, feels like a small shift. For decades, New Zealand's landscapes have been borrowed, renamed, dressed up as somewhere fictional. Now Queenstown gets to be Queenstown. And if you've ever been there, or even if you've only seen photographs, you'll know why that name alone carries weight. It's a place that doesn't need to pretend to be anything else. Somewhere on the far side of the world tonight, a town by a deep, cold lake is about to become a little more familiar to millions who have never been. That feels worth noting and worth carrying into the quiet. Gabon, that quiet green heart of Central Africa with its vast rainforests and Atlantic coast, is watching its public debt climb up 23%, according to recent reporting. The number itself is striking, but the story behind it is about direction. Gabon's government has been turning to regional markets to borrow, looking closer to home rather than outward to the usual global creditors. It's a shift you see across parts of Africa these days, as countries seek financing from neighbors and regional institutions, a kind of mutual reliance that carries both promise and weight. More debt means more room to invest, but it also means more to repay, and the balance between those two things is never simple. Gabon has been through a stretch of change already. A political transition not long ago reshaped its leadership, and the country is still finding its footing in that new landscape. Against that backdrop, a rising debt figure is less a crisis than a signal, a sign of a country building, borrowing, and choosing where to place its trust. If you're still with me, you might sit with that image for a moment, a nation looking to its own region, its own partners, for the resources to move forward. The numbers will tell us in time whether that confidence was well placed. For now, Gabon carries the figure quietly, the way a country often does, working through the night, planning for morning. Mexico sits at the edge of two tectonic plates, and the earth there reminds people of it often. This week, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck offshore near the Mexico-Guatemala border, strong enough to send tremors across a wide stretch of the south and to prompt tsunami monitoring along both coastlines. Aid groups like Direct Relief watched the situation closely, and the U.S. Embassy in Mexico issued a natural disaster alert for the southwest. But in the hours that followed, no immediate damage was reported, no collapsed buildings, no casualties, just the strange, unsettled quiet that comes after the ground decides to move and then, for once, stops. If you've never felt an earthquake, it's hard to explain how long those seconds are. The floor becomes something you can't trust. A glass on a table starts to walk, and then you wait, because the real fear is always the aftershock, the second wave, the thing that might come next. This time it seems to have held. The people who live along that border, in Chiapas, in Guatemala's western highlands, know this rhythm well. They've rebuilt before. They've checked on their neighbors before, and this week it seems they were spared the hardest part. So the story from Mexico tonight is not about destruction. It's about the breath you take when the worst doesn't come, and the quiet gratitude of a region that knows how close it always is. Uzbekistan sits at the heart of Central Asia, landlocked and surrounded by neighbors whose histories have been tangled with its own for centuries. These days, one of the quieter stories worth carrying into the night is about a railway, a line meant to connect China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan in a single corridor of steel. The idea has been talked about for a long time, and lately there has been real progress. Surveys, agreements, the slow bureaucratic work of three governments learning to build something together. It is the kind of story that does not move quickly, and perhaps that is fitting. A railway through mountains and high plateaus was never going to be simple. The challenges that remain are the ones you might expect. Terrain, financing, the sheer logistics of aligning three different systems across difficult ground. But the direction of travel matters. For Uzbekistan, a country that has long depended on older routes north and south, a new line eastward opens different possibilities. Not just cargo, though cargo is part of it, but a quieter kind of connection, the sense that the region is stitching itself into wider patterns of trade and movement. If you are still with me, picture the route as it might one day look. Trains climbing through Kyrgyz passes, descending into the fertile valleys around Tashkent, carrying goods and people along a path that has existed in conversation for years and is now slowly taking shape in the world. It is not finished. It may not be for some time. But progress, even slow progress, has its own kind of dignity. Laos has been in the news these days for a story that sits heavy in the chest. Last year, several young travelers, backpackers from Australia, Denmark, and elsewhere, died after drinking alcohol tainted with methanol at a hostel in the northern part of the country. Methanol is a toxic industrial alcohol, sometimes slipped into cheap liquor, and even a small amount can be lethal. Among the dead were 2 Australian teenagers, barely beginning their journeys. Now, Lao authorities have filed charges against the owners of the distillery believed to have produced the tainted drink. But the charges, according to Danish officials who confirmed the development, are minor. And that has stirred something fierce and raw in the families left behind. Parents of the Australian teens have called the charges unacceptable, too light, too narrow, not equal to the lives that were lost. Australia's government has summoned Laos's ambassador to press the point, asking for more serious charges and a fuller accounting. It's a difficult thing, this space between a country's legal process and a family's need for justice that feels real. Laos depends on backpackers and young travelers. They come for the rivers, the mountains, the slow pace of river town life. And now there's this shadow over that welcome. The families aren't asking for vengeance. They're asking for the loss of their children to be taken seriously, to be met with something proportionate to the grief they carry. If you're still with me, let's sit with that for a moment before we move on. Algeria is mourning this week after a fire swept through a foster care home, killing 11 children and injuring 19 others. The blaze broke out at an orphanage in the province of Blida, not far from the capital. State television has reported that a spark from an air conditioning unit likely caused it. How quickly a single spark can become a catastrophe in a building full of sleeping children. Neighbors spoke of hearing screams in the night and rushing toward the home, but the fire moved faster than anyone could. Among the dead were the most vulnerable children who had already been placed in the care of others, children whose safety was supposed to be guaranteed. President Abdelmajid Tebboune acknowledged the loss publicly, and the country has been left to sit with a grief that doesn't quite know where to put itself. 19 more children were injured and are being treated, their conditions and their fear both very real. Investigations are underway, as they always are after something like this. But the questions they raise about safety standards, about oversight, about whether enough was done, will not bring anyone back. If you're still with me, you might hold for a moment the thought of those children, and the people who cared for them, and the neighbors who ran toward the fire. Some losses are too heavy for words to carry. They just need to be set down gently, and acknowledged, and left in the quiet. Burundi sits small and landlocked in the heart of Africa, pressed between Tanzania, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a country of green hills and deep lakes, and these days it's making a quiet effort that might not make headlines elsewhere but matters here. UNESCO has noted that Burundi is taking a key step toward integrating freedom of expression into its national framework. The details are still emerging, but the direction itself is worth pausing on. Freedom of expression in Burundi has had a complicated history. Journalists and citizens alike have navigated periods where speaking openly carried real risk. So a step, even a procedural one, toward embedding that freedom more firmly in the country's institutions is not nothing. It's the kind of change that arrives slowly, without fanfare, and whose real meaning only becomes clear over time. What it suggests is a recognition that a country's story is told best by its own people, and that telling it should not come at a cost. If you're still with me, you might picture Bujumbura in the evening light, the city resting along the northeastern shore of Lake Tanganyika, and somewhere in that stillness, a conversation about rights that used to feel out of reach beginning to feel possible. Not a triumph, not yet, but a step taken quietly in a direction worth watching. El Salvador sits on the Pacific edge of Central America, close enough to the ocean's deep seams that the ground sometimes moves, even when the trouble starts far away. This week, a powerful earthquake struck off the coast of Mexico, near the Guatemala border. A 7.3 magnitude, strong enough to send waves of energy southward through the Earth's crust. People in Guatemala felt it first, and then, across the border, Salvadorans felt it too. Buildings swayed. In some towns, people stepped out into the streets, waiting to see if the shaking would return. For a while, there was a tsunami alert, the kind that emergency agencies issue quickly and hold on to until they're sure the sea is behaving. It was lifted before long, and here's the part worth holding on to tonight. No damage was reported, no injuries. No collapsed walls, no flooded coastlines. Just a long, low tremor that passed through like a deep breath and then left. If you've ever been in an earthquake, even a small one, you know the particular silence that follows, the way everything seems to pause and listen. El Salvador has known far worse quakes in its history, ones that reshaped cities and took lives. So a night like this one, when the earth moves and nothing breaks, carries its own quiet kind of relief. The streets settled. The sea stayed where it was, and the night went on. Spain is on the verge of something no country has done before. Their men's team has reached the final of the 2026 World Cup, where they'll face Argentina. If they win, Spain would become the first nation to hold both the men's and women's World Cup trophies in succession. The women lifted theirs in 2023. Now the men have a chance to complete the pair. It's the kind of coincidence that feels almost too neat for real life. But football rarely cares about symmetry. It just happens, and then everyone tries to make sense of it after. The final brings together two teams with deep claims on the sport. Argentina, of course, are defending champions and carry the weight of that history. Spain's run through the tournament has been marked by a kind of fluency that's drawn admirers from across the football world. The Guardian called them unbeatables facing the ultimate test. There will be presidents and kings in the stands, and for the first time, the winners will receive World Cup rings, not just a trophy. Fans will even be able to buy their own versions, but for all the ceremony building around the match, the heart of it remains simple. 22 players, 90 minutes, and a country waiting to see if it can hold both halves of the game's biggest prize at once. If you're still with me, imagine the quiet in Spanish homes that evening, wherever people gather to watch. Some celebrations echo for years, some fall silent at the final whistle. Either way, Spain has already traveled further than most expected. Latvia is quietly looking for a partner for its airline. Air Baltic, the national carrier based in Riga, has been struggling, and the country's prime minister has confirmed that the government is in talks with a strategic investor, someone who might help steady the airline and carry it forward. For a small country on the Baltic Sea, a national airline is more than a business. It's a thread connecting Riga to the rest of Europe and beyond. Air Baltic has long served as that thread, carrying passengers to and from a country whose history includes decades of Soviet occupation before independence was restored in 1991. So when the airline falters, it's not just a balance sheet that wobbles, it's a sense of connection. The talks are still underway, and there's no word yet on who the investor might be or what shape a deal could take. But the fact that conversations are happening at all suggests Latvia is thinking carefully about how to keep its skies open, not by holding on alone, but by finding someone willing to share the weight. It's the kind of decision a small country knows well, when to stand on its own and when to reach for a partner. And in the quiet of these negotiations, there's something familiar, a patient, practical hope that the runway ahead can still be steady. Gambia is a small country, a narrow ribbon of land following the Gambia River through the heart of West Africa, nearly surrounded by Senegal. It's home to about 2.5 million people, many of them living in communities where the nearest hospital can be a long and difficult journey. So when 10 ambulances arrive, backed by medical equipment and supported through the African Development Bank Group, it's not just a headline about vehicles, it's about the minutes between a crisis and a response. In a place where emergency transport has long been stretched thin, those minutes matter in ways that are hard to overstate. A complication in childbirth, a road accident, a sudden illness. These don't wait for infrastructure to catch up. They simply happen, and someone has to get to care. 10 ambulances won't solve every problem, of course. Gambia's health system, like many in the region, faces ongoing pressures: staffing, supplies, the sheer geography of serving scattered communities along a river that winds for hundreds of miles. But each vehicle represents a route that didn't reliably exist before. A connection between a clinic and a hospital, between a village and a surgeon, between a family's worst moment and the possibility of help arriving in time. There's something quietly profound about that kind of progress. Not dramatic, not loud, just the slow, practical work of making a country's care a little more reachable. And for the people who'll ride in those ambulances or wait for them and see them come, that's the story worth carrying tonight. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.